Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Charlotte, which goes down this weekend. I'll be honest, it's not one of my favourite cards from, just looking at the overall fight selection on the event. There are a couple of good fights in here though, but yeah, overall a little bit weak in my opinion. But for me, it actually works out okay because a very rare scenario is I won't be watching the fights this weekend. I'm on a stag do, or for you guys in America, I believe that's a bachelor party. So yeah, I'm away this weekend. I won't be watching the fights. So for me, it's actually a perfect event to miss the fights. But just before we get into the breakdowns very quickly, there will be a Baze AI recap on our YouTube channel from last weekend's good pay-per-view event at UFC 288. Baze AI hit 75% on the straight pick predictions accuracy, but more importantly, it hit a number of underdogs as well. So I'll be covering all of that on the Baze AI recap, and again, that'll be on our YouTube channel in the specific Baze AI playlist, and that's youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But diving in straight into the breakdowns now, and we go with the main event, which in the heavyweight division, I actually like this fight quite a lot. We've got Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Jailton Almeida. Now, Jailton Almeida is a fighter now that for the last 2 or 3 fights I've been calling that needs to be fighting at the very top of this division, just because outside of a certain level of opponent, he's just going to run through these fighters at heavyweight. And before I actually get into the breakdowns, just something that I really like about Almeida as well, I kind of feel like his IQ as a fighter and as a person is really at a high level, because this is a guy that, again, in my opinion, I feel like he's got a frame for light heavyweight, a perfect frame for light heavyweight. But he sees that there's an opportunity at heavyweight, an opportunity to be able to get these big men down, because once the bigger men are down, they have a much harder time of getting back up to their feet unless they've got a really good jiu-jitsu base. And not many of these heavyweight fighters are what you would class as like a BJJ phenom, like, a Damian Maia or a Rodolfo Vieira. These fighters at heavyweight, once they are taken down, I'm not saying that they can't get back up, but they just have a much harder time getting back to the feet, whereas Jailton Almeida could have gone to light heavyweight, but I do feel that his style would be a little bit harder at light heavyweight, because the light heavyweight fighters still hit hard, but they're going to have a better chance of being able to get back up to the feet because they're a little bit lighter and they're a little bit quicker in the scrambles, in the jiu-jitsu. So I think that Almeida's actually made a really, really smart decision by deciding to fight in the heavyweight division. Sure, it's a little bit harder to take the big man down, but once they are down, Jailton Almeida can slice through them like a knife through butter. And then that brings us to this fight, and what I love about this fight is the fact that Rozenstruik is not only at the top or the upper end of the division, should I say, and Jailton Almeida, it's a really deserved step up. But what I like about Rozenstruik is he's got this one-punch knockout power, the same one-punch knockout power that Derek Lewis has, that Francis Ngannou had in the UFC as well. And it's these types of fighters that you have to fight smart against, because if you make one mistake, one big punch, and you're completely out. But the downfall to this for Rozenstruik, and the exact same that you get with Derek Lewis, is that if you get put on your back, if Rozenstruik gets taken down and put on his back, or if Derek Lewis got taken down and put on his back, that's when the trouble starts. That's when you can really go to work on these fighters with the big one-punch knockout power, because they do have a harder time of getting back up to the feet. Derek Lewis wasn't terrible, to be fair to him. He did have these really good explosions where he could use power and strength to stand back up. But Rozenstruik, I feel, is definitely on the lighter end of that get-up game. I definitely don't think that he's going to be able to get back up if Almeida takes him down, and this is where I have issues with Rozenstruik winning this fight, because I think Rozenstruik's a decent kickboxer. Like I said, he's got that touch of death power. He can touch Jailton Almeida, potentially knock him out, especially as there's going to be a big weight and power discrepancy here. But the problem is Jailton Almeida closes the distance really well. He's able to get in on the legs. He's able to just take his time and not rush. And in this fight, he's actually got 5 rounds to do it as well. So he doesn't even need to think, halfway through the second round, if it has just been a little bit touch and go, he doesn't need to get desperate for takedowns, because I genuinely believe that he only needs one takedown to win this fight. I think that once he gets Rozenstruik down, it's either going to be a ground and pound job, or he's going to submit Rozenstruik and get him out of there. Jailton Almeida, I think, is a serious dark horse in this division. We're talking about John Jones. We're talking about Sergey Pavlovich. We're talking about other big fighters in the division. You know, we were talking about Tom Aspinall for a while, but I think Jailton Almeida is going to be the one that comes through and tests everybody in this division, including Sergey Pavlovich. In fact, I do think that if the UFC are dead set and have, concluded the negotiations between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic, I think that should Almeida win this fight against Rozenstruik, which I think he will, I actually would love the UFC to make Sergey Pavlovich and Almeida as a number one contenders fight for a guaranteed spot at the winner between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. Now, if they haven't made that Jones and Miocic fight, I think Pavlovich should absolutely be next, and Almeida should, have that number one contender fight, potentially with Miocic, or even if he performs well here and gets Rozenstruik out of there early, which I think he probably will, then Almeida should have that next shot. But ultimately, coming back to this fight, as long as Almeida avoids that bomb from Rozenstruik, avoids getting hit, which is always a possibility at heavyweight. However, like I said, I do think Almeida's a smart fighter, closes the distance well. I think he'll be able to get in on Rozenstruik and take him down before Rozenstruik's landed anything significant on him. And like I said, I think it's only going to take one takedown. I don't think Rozenstruik will get back up, and if Jailton Almeida doesn't finish the fight after that first takedown, then it'll just be a case of him winning the round. He'll rinse and repeat again in the next round. I don't think it'll take longer than a couple of rounds. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jailton Almeida to win this fight. And in the next fight in the co-main event in the light heavyweight division, so we've got some more big boys. We've got Anthony Smith versus Johnny Walker, and it's an interesting fight because Anthony Smith, I feel like he's this good all-round fighter. He's a fighter that I don't think is going to make his way to another title shot, but he's definitely going to be a fighter that might even play that gatekeeper role as well. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. The gatekeeper role is still a very solid role, considering that the UFC light heavyweight division is stacked full of a lot of killers. But I feel like Anthony Smith is going to be that fighter where if you beat him, then yeah, you can move forwards and you've got a good chance of making it, into the top 10, top 5, potentially a title fight potential champion. But if you lose against Anthony Smith, then it's a time to reset, hone your skills, develop and come back. And I think that type of fighter is always a very difficult type, and not only to cap, to read, but to actually get a solid prediction on. And with someone like Johnny Walker, I always feel myself gravitating to Walker when it comes to these predictions, just because we are in the light heavyweight division. He's explosive as fuck. He's got a ton of power. He's got good speed. And the thing is with Johnny Walker is, in this type of fight, maybe a couple of years ago, the one worry I would have is Anthony Smith taking him down and submitting him. Because Johnny Walker, once he was taken down and put on his back, didn't really have a whole lot to offer. And admittedly, he's not developed leaps and bounds over the last couple of years. But he is working with Kavanagh at SBG in Ireland. Now, Kavanagh is a high-level black belt. He's going to be improving Johnny Walker's jiu-jitsu, and we actually saw that against Cutelaba in Walker's last fight. Walker was taken down and he had some moments flat on his back, but the bottom line is, within that same round, Walker ended up choking Cutelaba out. So I think that Johnny Walker's got an improved ground game. I think his wrestling's still very hit and miss, so I do think Smith might be able to take him down here, and that's my one pause and my one concern for Johnny Walker. If I knew that Johnny Walker could defend takedowns, I'd be much more confident in Walker, but I'm not sure that he can defend the takedowns. I just think that once he is taken down, he's going to have a better, or he's going to be able to give himself a better chance of getting back up to his feet, sweeping or reversing. I think Anthony Smith's still going to be the slightly better grappler, but I think Johnny Walker can make it much more competitive if he's put on his back, and that's the key thing here. Because when we're looking at the striking, I think it is Johnny Walker all day long. Smith's a good striker as well. Like I said, he's this really good, well-round fighter, but I think that for Anthony Smith to stand in front of Johnny Walker for 15 minutes, he's probably going to get knocked out, and that's where, again, I'm gravitating towards Johnny Walker, because I think he's got a massive finishing upside on the feet. I think Anthony Smith has a path to victory with the wrestling and grappling, but I think Walker's going to be much more competitive with the grappling now than what he would have been a couple of years ago. So maybe Walker can get back up to this feet and make this fight won and lost on the feet. And if he can, then sure, Smith's going to have his opportunities on the feet against someone like Johnny Walker, but I just think it's a knockout waiting to happen if the majority of this fight plays out on the feet, which I am leaning towards just because of the improvements that Walker is making in the jiu-jitsu with Kavanagh at SBG. So yeah, I'm picking Johnny Walker to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I definitely think a lot of people need to keep their eye on because it's a very good fight, it's a well-matched fight, and it's a fight that provides a test for a fighter that has got a lot of hype on them at the minute. And what we've got is D-Rod Daniel Rodriguez versus Ian Machado Garry. Now, Ian Garry is the fighter that's got the hype on him, you know, the fighter from Ireland. He talks well. He started his career as an amateur in Cage Warriors, came all the way through Cage Warriors, won the belt, came into the UFC. I say it time and time again, I followed Ian Garry from those amateur fights in Cage Warriors, so I've seen his rise from an amateur to a pro into the UFC. He's one of the fighters that I know more about than most other fighters, just because I've watched his entire career. You know, I called this UFC career a long time ago, and you know, there's been moments like last fight when Ian Garry fought Kanan Song. There was some moments in there, but listen, in these UFC level fights, there's always going to be moments for an opponent. It doesn't necessarily mean that a fighter's bad or there's an incorrect hype train on him or he's a fraud or anything like that. So I think Ian Garry is still a legitimate fighter. I think he's a fighter with a massive ceiling. I genuinely think he's going to make it into the top 5 in the division, top 3 maybe. And it wouldn't totally shock me in the next 5 years if we saw him having a title fight or actually being the division's champion. So Ian Garry's definitely got the skills, qualities and abilities, but for this stage in his career, because I mean, you know, for him to make top 5, top 3, a title fight or being a champion, he's got to make huge developments. Of course he has. But for right now, I think this is a really good test for Ian Garry because Daniel Rodriguez is a fighter that has a good all-round game. He's got really good striking. He's got power. He's got decent movement. He's got good aggression. He's got a decent wrestling game, a decent grappling game. He's just going to be able to provide that test for Garry. And also, Daniel Rodriguez has been in there with some of the best fighters in the division as well. So it's going to be, like I keep saying, a really good test and a good measuring stick to where Ian Garry is right now. But I think that Ian Garry's got a lot of advantages in this fight. I think he's going to be the quicker fighter in regards to his speed and his movement as well. I think if he just stays on his bike a little bit, doesn't plant his feet, doesn't throw a combination and then stay there waiting for the picture to be taken before he moves out of range, I think Gary's just going to be able to put a high volume approach on Daniel Rodriguez, stay out of the way of the power shots and be able to, again, just style a little bit inside the cage. But I do think even if Daniel Rodriguez does land a couple of hard shots on Garry, even if he does hurt him, we've actually seen good recoverability from Garry. He's taken the shots now, he's felt that power punch, and he's able to, we know that he's able to battle through adversity and, again, fight through being hurt, which is key for a fighter that's going to go a long way in the UFC. You've got to know that when it gets tough that the fighter can pull through, and Ian Garry can absolutely do that. Now, I think it's going to be a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. I don't think Rodriguez is going to revert to wrestling here and try and take Garry down. If he does, I'm not sure how successful he'd be, but that's just not Rodriguez's style. I think actually if there is a takedown in this fight, it might be more from Ian Garry's side. But again, I think Rodriguez is going to be here for the war, a striking war, and I think Ian Garry's going to just accept. I think we've got Daniel Rodriguez that is going to be trying to land the power punches on Garry, but I think Gary's going to be the one that's landing a ton of volume, trying to piece Daniel Rodriguez up and trying to hurt him through accumulation of volume as well. It's a really good fight. It's a really, really good fight. I also think from the betting perspective, I think the line is a little bit too wide. I think it's slightly disrespectful on Daniel Rodriguez's side, so it wouldn't shock me for that line to close up a little bit, or maybe it does widen with the hype on Garry. I do think Ian Garry wins this fight. I do think he makes yet another statement in the UFC, but man, this is a very well-matched fight. I am looking forward to, you know, watching this back and seeing how the fight plays out, but from a prediction perspective, I am picking Ian Machado Garry to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill. Yet another stylistic clash. We've got one fighter that's clearly a grappler and one fighter that's very clearly a striker. And Mackenzie Dern's another one of these fighters. Like I said with Johnny Walker, I just find myself gravitating towards her when it comes to making a pick and a prediction. Just because I think that even though she's a specialist, I think that one area of specialty is just, it's huge. Mackenzie Dern's such a decorated jiu-jitsu artist, and I think that although you know it's proven now, you can't just assume that if Dern's going to take these women down at the top of the division that she's going to get them out of there. You know, we've seen a couple of fights, even though Dern is credentialed as they come in regards to the jiu-jitsu still in these high-level fights. It's not easy for her to take these fighters down, but it provides enough pause, halt, and hesitancy from the opponent to really allow Dern to move forward, get her game going, and get the fight down to the mat, because these fighters fighting against her are not wanting to overexert and not wanting to throw too much of a long combination or miss on a punch and Dern level change and take them down. This is one area where I think that Dern's able to capitalise on her opponents, but one area that I definitely think Dern needs to improve on is her wrestling. It's frustrating because Dern is this world-class grappler, but her wrestling struggles, and these fighters aren't going to try and take Dern down. The opponents aren't. Angela Hill's not going to try and take Dern down. I mean, even if Angela Hill had more of a grappling base and was predominantly a grappler, Angela Hill would probably still try and strike with her because Dern's that good on the mat. So for Dern to get the fights to where she's strongest, her wrestling plays a massive factor in that. So I don't understand why she just doesn't, take a few months off, go to a wrestling gym or a wrestling base somewhere in America and just absolutely hammer that wrestling. But back to this fight, you're going to have Dern that's going to want to try and get the fight down to the mat. You're going to have Angela Hill that wants to keep the fight striking. If this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, Angela Hill wins all day long. If it's not, if we see some takedowns, if we see some topside control, I think that not only has Mackenzie Dern got the finishing upside, but that's also her world as well. And I do think that, look, although Dern does need to develop and improve in regards to her takedowns, I do think she has ways of getting fights down to the mat, of course, because she wouldn't have won the amount of fights that she's won in the UFC if she wasn't scoring takedowns. So I do think that Mackenzie Dern can find ways to get Angela Hill down. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a little bit of cardio. It's going to take a little bit of patience as well. But there's 3 rounds in this fight, not 5. So I think that Dern doesn't have to distribute a gas tank and cardio for that extra 10 minutes. So I do think that she's going to be able to get fights down to the mat. In regards to her striking, although Mackenzie Dern is going to be outmatched here, she has got somewhat power in her hands, or at least she throws the big bombs. And that is a good aid into trying to get the hands of her opponents to come up to block and defend and then level change on the hips. So, look, Mackenzie Dern isn't completely outmatched on the feet. Although she is outmatched, it's just not going to be a complete whitewash is what I'm trying to say. I think the biggest gap in skill in this fight is within the area of the grappling. That's where Mackenzie Dern's strongest. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mackenzie Dern to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tim Means versus Alex Morono. This could be a fun fight as well. I think on the feet is where it's going to be won and lost. It wouldn't surprise me to see some wrestling and a little bit of grappling. Both fighters do have low-key decent wrestling and low-key decent grappling as well, but for the most part, I think the fight is going to be determined by who's the better striker rather than who's mixed things up, who's got the takedowns, who's got the top side control. And that's because I think, look, both fighters, it wouldn't shock me if either fighter was taken down, but for either fighter to spend a good time on top of their opponents and rack up a load of top control time or land brutal ground and pound or find a submission, I just don't see it. I think that if either fighter is taken down, it's not going to be long before the opponent gets back up. So considering that this fight has a good chance and a good probability of playing out on the feet, I think that it's going to be competitive, but I think one fighter is going to slowly pull away with the fight, round by round, or for as long as it goes. And I think that fighter is more likely to be Alex Morono. I think that Morono, again, he fights competitive with almost everybody, whether they're a better opponent than him or a worse opponent than him. But he fights competitive, but against the worse opponent, he just finds that ability to just start landing a few more strikes, get the volume up, get the numbers up, put the slightly more powerful strikes together, and just in these close competitive rounds, just find that edge within the round. But I think that Morono also has the finishing upside in this fight as well. I think if this was a few years ago, Tim Means would be much more live for a knockout, but Tim Means is getting on the older side. He is declining a little bit. He's been in there with some of the best over so many years, and there's a lot of mileage on the clock. So I think that's another advantage for Morono here. I think he's got the striking, finishing upside, and I think when it comes to the rounds, and if it does go to a decision, it wouldn't shock me for Tim Means to take a round for sure, but Morono, for me, I think has just got that ability to pull away round by round, and he's the more likely fighter to win on a decision as well, just by taking, a couple of rounds. And I think Morono could comfortably take 2 rounds here if it does go to a decision. If it doesn't, and you're saying that there's going to be a knockout in this fight, again, I'm gonna side with Alex Morono to find that knockout as well. So yeah, I'm picking Alex Morono to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between 2 veterans, and I love this type of fight because the UFC just aren't presenting 2 older fighters, 2 declining fighters, a young killer that is just going to absolutely run through them and hurt them badly, knock them out. And we've got a 38-year-old versus a 42-year-old, and these are the type of fights that we definitely need to see for these types of fighters. We've got Matt Brown versus Court McGee, and like I say, I don't think that either of these fighters are going to be close to that young killer type of performance where they're just going to run through one or the other and absolutely take them out, hurt them badly, and make us wish that the UFC had matched them in a different way. But it's a good stylistic fight because I think that Court McGee for Court McGee to win this fight, I think that he's got to get back to his wrestling, that exact type of game plan that he did against Ramiz Brahimaj, where he was just ugly, dirty, gritty, grinding, close the distance, really put the pressure on Ramiz Brahimaj and, really make him work inside the clinch, use his strength. I think that type of performance from Court McGee here, if he's successful, will get him a win against Matt Brown. But for Matt Brown, like in this fight, he's absolutely the better striker in my opinion. He's still got very good Muay Thai. He's still got power. We saw that knockout of Diego Lima, and it wasn't going Matt Brown's way in that fight. But man, to knock Lima out like that, Matt Brown's still got power. He's still dangerous. He's really difficult to deal with inside the clinch with sharp elbows, knees, that Muay Thai base that Matt Brown's got. It's a real old school, typical Muay Thai base, and it's really fun to watch because we just don't see too much of it anymore. A lot of these fighters that are coming into the UFC now are fighters that have done mixed martial arts from being young, and they've got an all-round base. We're starting to see less and less of this real defined, typical, specific base in a specific discipline, which for Matt Brown is Muay Thai. So look, from Matt Brown's side as well, I think that he's got underrated jiu-jitsu. I think that's something that a lot of people tend to miss out with Matt Brown, and I think that he's a very good all-round fighter too, just like Court McGee, because when I've spoke about Court McGee's wrestling and his grinding style, but he's also not a bad striker either. So yeah, it is a well-matched fight. Now, the edge that I'm going to give in this fight is slightly towards Matt Brown because, look, I think if Court McGee uses that same type of game plan that he used against Ramiz Brahimaj, one of the reasons I think that Brahimaj struggled in that fight is because Court McGee had that old man strength and Brahimaj just was at a massive strength disadvantage in my opinion, and he just couldn't compete with McGee in those close quarters, whereas Matt Brown, he's also got that old man strength as well. Like, he's definitely strong. We've seen it for years, especially in the clinch as well, and that's where Court McGee is going to be doing the best work if he adopts this game plan. And I think entering the clinch with Matt Brown, if Matt Brown can use his strength and turn McGee and frame off and start landing elbows and knees, I think that Court McGee could be in trouble there. I think if Court McGee takes Matt Brown down, that's the one area of concern for Matt Brown, because we have seen his ground game's hit and miss. Like, he's got a good jiu-jitsu game, an underrated jiu-jitsu game, like I've already mentioned, but there are fights where he has been stuck on his back and he's struggling to find a submission, sweep, reverse, or stand back up. And I think if we see that version of Matt Brown with the wrestling version of Court McGee, that could be an easy win for Court McGee. He could end up looking like a big favourite in this fight, but it's not every fight we see that from Matt Brown. And I think if Matt Brown can get back up to his feet or sweep and reverse and get on top of McGee, or like I said, just get back up to his feet, I think that the fight is going to be much more competitive. And that's the way I am actually slightly leaning, because for Court McGee to get these takedowns, he's got to close the distance, get in that clinch, but he's closing the distance and entering into the wheelhouse of Matt Brown. And this is what makes it a real interesting dynamic in this fight. I think it's a really good fight. It's a good matchup from a veteran perspective, and I think both of these fighters' styles will complement each other's styles, but when I'm looking for an edge, I'm going to slightly lean with the fighter who I do believe is a little bit more dangerous and also well-rounded as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Matt Brown to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're back with the big boys. We've got Karl Williams versus Chase Sherman. And man, the UFC did not let Chase Sherman off with this one. This is a fight that should have happened a few weeks ago. I believe it was Sherman that pulled out. I think it was fight night as well. And you know, the UFC have rebooked it. They've not let Sherman off the hook with this one. And I do think it's a fight that's going to be very difficult for Sherman and also very difficult for Sherman's style as well. Look, Karl Williams is one of my favourite fighters to come into the UFC this year. You know, he's a big heavyweight. He expends a lot of his cardio. You know, he doesn't reserve it too much. He's got suplexes. He's got big takedowns. He's got big power, ground and pound. He'll fight on the feet as well and look to land bombs on the feet. The dude's just an entertaining heavyweight. Where his ceiling is at is a little bit unsure right now. We'll see how he develops. We'll see how he starts managing his energy and his gas tank, because the further he moves up in the division, the harder it's going to be to do what he's doing to these fighters, you know, in the lower end of the competition in the UFC, shall we say. But for here with Chase Sherman, look, I think Sherman's path to victory here is just to beat up that leg early of Karl Williams, stay out of range, don't get hit with anything hard. If Karl Williams is starting to close the distance, you know, use movement, exit angles, get back out into open space and just beat that lead leg up of Karl Williams. We know that, look, for whatever you think of Chase Sherman, because the dude does take a lot of shit online, whatever you think of Sherman, he does have a very hard low kick and he does have some power as well. So he's got to just start taking that frame and that base away from Williams, otherwise it's going to be an ugly night for him. But ultimately, I do think that Williams is going to be able to close the distance early. I think he's going to be happy striking with Sherman, to be honest. I think once he gets into the boxing range, I think Karl Williams will feel comfortable landing bombs. It'll take away that low kick from Sherman as well, just because the range won't be there for it. And Williams can either, you know, land some hard shots on Sherman and try and hurt him, or just get into the hips, lift him up, dump him down. And I think Williams will do a good job on Chase Sherman with Chase Sherman's on his back. I think that the ground and pound of Williams will be there. I think threatening for submissions will be there as well. If Sherman does stand back up, I see Karl Williams just being able to, again, just keep a hold of him, lift him back up, dump him down. I think it's going to be another fun performance from Williams. I think it's a very difficult fight for Chase Sherman. So for those reasons, I'm picking Karl Williams to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight actually. We've got Cody Stamann versus Douglas Silva de Andrade. Now, Cody Stamann was one of these fighters, you know, a number of years ago that I thought was going to be a big player in the division. You know, he had solid wrestling, Golden Gloves boxing. So I thought that Stamann was going to be that typical boxer wrestler style of fighter that has got good hands and can, work into a level change really effectively, really efficiently. And he started off very much like that in the UFC. But just like I mentioned with Jessica Andrade actually last week, in regards to fighters that, you know, in the early stages of the career, they've got a heavy wrestling game, they're scoring a high number of takedowns and looking like they're going to be a real problem. But then in the more recent tape, in the more recent years, have just stopped using the wrestling and just relying more on the striking, because a lot of fighters tend to fall in love with the striking after, you know, they score a couple of knockouts. And we saw that with Andrade actually play out in the fight. You know, Andrade was getting pieced up by Yan Xiaonan, but instead of thinking, right, I'm getting pieced up, let's level change into a takedown and go somewhere where I know I've got a clear advantage, she didn't. She just resorted to throwing big bombs instead, which led to her getting knocked out. And Cody Stamann, I think, has got similar recent qualities in regards to how he's performing inside the cage, because the takedowns just have dried out for him. And there's been some fights like against Luan Lacerda last time out. You know, I think Cody Stamann could have landed some takedowns against him. And I know it was the danger because Luan Lacerda was the jiu-jitsu specialist. But, you know, Stamann's not likely to get submitted off his back with an armbar or a triangle by Luan Lacerda. So I think that, you know, especially in that third round when Cody Stamann was getting lit up a little bit. And again, that's a little bit of a concern as well. You know, you look back at that third round, he's a little bit tired and, you know, not really performing like he did in the first two rounds. He could have potentially mixed in some wrestling, but he didn't. So I think although Stamann's got a wrestling advantage in this fight, how much stock you can put in that, I'm not too sure. But if the wrestling does play into this fight from Cody Stamann's perspective, how much does Cody Stamann make use of that takedown in regards to the ground game? Well, Douglas Silva de Andrade is a difficult fighter to take down, first and foremost. He's a ball of energy. He's on that good Brazilian Akai, and he's got power, he's got strength, and he's just a difficult fighter to take down. But when you do take him down, he's able to quickly get back up as well. So I think that even if Stamann did flip the script a little bit on the recent performances and did come into this fight with a wrestling game plan, I think that Andrade is going to be able to get back up to his feet should Stamann take him down. So I think it's a fight, ultimately what I'm trying to get at is going to be won and lost on the feet. And even though Andrade has got some takedowns in his back pocket, I don't see him taking Stamann down either. I think Stamann, although he can be taken down and he has been taken down in a lot of fights, I think that Stamann will be able to defend takedowns. And again, the same thing. Andrade takes Stamann down. I think Stamann gets back up to his feet. So, yeah, I think it's a fight that's going to have the majority of its action played out on the feet. And because of that, I think it's going to be a really close and competitive fight. I think Stamann's going to have the volume upside. Absolutely. I don't think there's any question in that. But Andrade is going to have that power upside, the finishing upside as well. And I think Andrade is going to be the one looking to land big bombs. I think if this fight should go to a decision, the judges are going to have a choice to make between the volume of Stamann, the cleaner shots of Stamann, or the big power strikes of Andrade. And obviously Andrade is going to be the fighter looking to, at least in the judges' eyes, finish the fight at all times with the fight ending power. So it's going to be one of these close and competitive fights. Now, I actually think, considering what I've seen last time from Stamann, the fact that he did slow down striking in that third round, the fact that he was getting beaten by Luan Lacerda in that third round in regards to the striking as well, and then you've got Andrade that can go all day long, all 3 rounds at a high pace. He can get hurt and still go 3 rounds at a high pace. I think that Andrade has fought the better level of competition, at least recently. And, you look at the Said Nurmagomedov fight, for example, and listen, I know MMA maths doesn't work, but you just look at the difference in the two performances. Stamann goes in there and gets choked out in the first round. Douglas Silva Andrade goes 3 rounds with Said Nurmagomedov and actually looking very competitive with him and from a striking perspective. I think that Said Nurmagomedov is a much better striker than Cody Stamann, and Andrade was very competitive with him over 3 rounds. And then you look at Andrade against Sergey Morozov. He took Sergey Morozov out of there. I thought Sergey Morozov was a fighter with huge promise in the division, and he still might be, but for Andrade to do that is impressive. I just think it's going to be a close fight. I like the striking and the boxing of Stamann. I think he's very calculated, patient. I love his approach to the striking. But there's something with Andrade here that just makes him very difficult for somebody like Cody Stamann to completely style on. And I do think that, considering that and the finishing upside and the fact if it goes 3 rounds it could be close, the finishing upside's a big one for me as well. For the sake of the prediction, I'm picking Douglas Silva Andrade to win this fight. And in the next fight, some more big boys. We've got Carlos Ulberg versus Ihor Potieria. And yeah, look, I think this is going to be a quick prediction and breakdown. I think that Carlos Ulberg's going to run through Potieria here. I think we've done on Carlos Ulberg for quite a while in regards to getting a good betting line. I bet on him last time out against Negameriano. I think I got -120 against Ulberg, which was mental, to be honest. But I don't think that we're going to see those sort of lines until Ulberg's now. I think he's going to be in a position where he's going to be cleaning out these types of fighters like Potieria, building himself up and developing, getting a good win streak together before the UFC puts him in there with a big step up in competition. I think until he gets that step up in competition, I'm just not sure we get those good lines anymore. Carlos Ulberg's currently sitting at around -300, so, it's very obvious that, and money keeps on coming in on him, so it's obvious to the public how it plays out, and I completely agree. I think that Potieria is a predominant striker. I think if he tries to take Ulberg down, I'm not sure if he gets it, to be honest. Ulberg's strong, he's got decent takedown defense. I think it's a fight Potieria is going to be forced to stand and strike with Ulberg, and I just feel that when Potieria strikes, is a bit reckless, he overexerts a lot as well, leaves himself a little bit off balance with openings for opponents to try and find counter shots, and I think that's exactly what Ulberg's going to do. And if Potieria is a little bit hesitant because he knows who he's got in front of him with how powerful Ulberg is and how much of a good technician he is with his striking as well, if that makes Potieria hesitant and he doesn't throw the volume that he normally throws, I think it's just going to allow Ulberg to come forward on him, pick and choose his strikes. And like I say, I think whether we do see a rare decision and Ulberg taking Potieria to the scorecards, I think in that type of fight, Ulberg's pieced him up. He's managed the range, the distance, the pace of the fight. and ultimately just put a good technical performance together. But if there's a finish here, I absolutely see that being Ulberg with the power that he's got, the counter strikes, and if he's just found a good opening for a straight punch and knocks Potieria out. So whether it goes to the scorecards or whether there's a finish, I'm picking Carlos Ulberg to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Natan Levy versus Pete Rodriguez. I broke this fight down a couple of weeks ago, I believe, on the other episode of the podcast. I'm not 100% what card or event it was, but yeah, this is a fight that should have happened a few weeks ago. Same breakdown, same prediction. I will run through it again though. So Pete Rodriguez, his path to victory here: be aggressive, land hard shots on Levy and try and knock him out. Pete Rodriguez is aggressive, he is fast, he does have power, and he does swing with combinations as well. So in the early moments of this fight, Natan Levy's got to mind his P's and Q's. But the thing is with Pete Rodriguez, not only, in my opinion, does he have to finish Levy to win, but he's also got a small window of opportunity, because if he doesn't get that knockout within the first 3 or 4 minutes of this fight, I think that Natan Levy's going to start finding the takedowns, he's going to start draining the gas tank of Pete Rodriguez, and he's going to start taking over the fight. And I think that Natan Levy can be relatively competitive with Rodriguez, but maybe more competitive with him the longer the fight goes. I think in the early moments, it would suit Levy just to decide to, level change, try and take Pete Rodriguez down. And worst case scenario, you just clinch up with him and push his back to the cage and start trying to drain the gas tank in the clinch. I think if Levy does turtle up or does start exchanging with Rodriguez early in this fight, I think that'd be a bad decision, but I don't see that happening. I do think that there's a storm to be weathered for Levy, but I do think he weathers that storm, and I do think the takedown's going to be a big factor in this fight. I think he is going to be able to take Rodriguez down. I think he is going to be able to do good work on the mat. And if he doesn't get Rodriguez out of there in the moments that he's on top, when the fight stands back up, I think Levy's going to start having a striking advantage as well. The karate background that he's got, and just being able to put some nice combinations together on a Pete Rodriguez who's probably a little bit depleted, a little bit tired. So yeah, I think it's a really good fight for Natan Levy. He's just got to weather that storm, which I think he does. So I'm picking Natan Levy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Yeon Kim versus Mandy Bohm. It's an interesting fight. I wouldn't be overly confident on either side though. Both fighters are relatively hard to trust. Yeon Kim, I think at one point actually started showing that she had some promise in the division, but she seems to have dropped off a little bit. Mandy Bohm on the other side, I think she's a fighter that has still got a lot of development and a lot of work to put in to be able to, start putting her in a conversation where she can go into fights and put multiple wins together. And I think there's a potential of that with Mandy Bohm. I think with Yeon Kim, she's more of a finished product, but when you come to this fight, when I say finished product as well, I don't mean that she's like completely declined and washed. I just don't think that we're going to see too many developments from Kim. I don't think we're going to see a different version of Kim in this fight than what we've seen in previous fights. But yeah, like I say, when we come to this fight in particular, I think that Yeon Kim right now is just a better version of where Mandy Bohm's at. I think Mandy Bohm, like I said, she can make the developments in my opinion, but I don't think the developments are going to be made enough in this fight to beat Yeon Kim. I think on the feet striking, in fact, I think everywhere could be relatively close if I'm being honest and competitive, but I just think that the level of competition Kim's been fighting, the experience that she's got as well in the UFC, I think she'll just have the edge in pretty much every area wherever this fight goes. But I do think it's a fight that's going to potentially be won and lost on the feet, and I think Kim's just going to be able to manage that range, manage the pace of the fight, dictate the pace of the fight, and just be able to fight her fight more than what Mandy Bohm's going to have. I don't think Mandy Bohm's going to have too much control in this fight of, where the fight's taking place and how the fight's manoeuvring towards her own style. I think it's going to be Kim that's got these advantages. So yeah, look, I think it's going to be competitive. I think Bohm's going to have her moments, but when it comes to actually picking a fighter and, trusting which side's going to outperform the other here, I just think it's more on Kim's side. So for those reasons, I'm picking Yeon Kim to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gabe Green versus Bryan Battle. And this is a good fight, to be fair. Look, Bryan Battle's always game. He's a fighter that's always going to try and be in his opponent's face. It's not easy to break him or get him out of there. Sure, he got broken last time out, but he was against a very, very solid wrestler and a fighter that absolutely had that wrestling game plan, and he just struggled a little bit. And with Gabe Green, I think that's one area that Gabe Green could exploit against Bryan Battle, because Green does have decent wrestling and he's got a good jiu-jitsu base as well. So I think that Green has got opportunities in this fight to get a takedown. If he does get Bryan Battle down, I think he can do good work on top. How long he keeps Battle on his back for, I'm not too sure about though. And the reason being is, look, Gabe Green will use and be very active within the jiu-jitsu, whereas last time out with Bryan Battle, the wrestler that he fought was basically top heavy, wanted one position and stayed in that position pretty much. Green will move around a little bit on the mat, and I think that'll give Battle opportunities to try and find a hole, a space, a gap to be able to get back up to his feet. But on the feet, I think although that's where Battle's gonna do his best work, I think Gabe Green's live there as well. I think he's a really solid striker. I think he's got good movement. He'll put combinations together. The one downfall to Gabe Green is he's hittable, so I think Battle's going to have opportunities to hit Green. And look, Battle does hit hard. You can't take that away from him. So there's an opportunity there for Battle as well. But again, Green's relatively durable, although he has been hurt a couple of times in the past. I think that from the striking perspective, Green's got a slight edge. I think from the wrestling perspective, Green's got a slight edge. And I think from the grappling perspective, he's got a slight edge as well. So I think it's a tough fight for Battle. I don't think it's one that you can automatically rule out that he's going to lose and get absolutely destroyed. But I think when you're looking at the small edges in a close and competitive fight, I think it's going to be Green that pulls away wherever the fight goes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gabe Green to win this fight. And finally, in the last breakdown of this episode of the podcast, we've got Jessica Rose Clark versus Tainara Lisboa. Now, the problem that I've got with Lisboa, the newcomer, is, man, the tape on her is just, A, it's limited, and B, it's like the level of competition she's been fighting is so low. She's either as good as she's seeing or being seen in tape and just beating what's in front of her, which, I say this for every fighter, you can only beat what the promotion is putting in front of you, and that's exactly what Lisboa's been doing. But she's either a great fighter and is taking out these opponents that's put in front of her for a reason, or she's taking out these opponents that are put in front of her just because they're not giving any sort of competitive edge to Lisboa, and then Lisboa is going to come into the UFC and actually fight a fighter that is experienced, that is a veteran, that has fought some really good fighters and get completely run over. And I'll be honest with you, I just don't know which one it is. I think that it's a little bit of a mystery. I think we're going to find out. This is definitely a fight where we need to watch it to find out. Well, we need to watch it to find out and find out where Lisboa is and how good she actually is. And I think this fight is actually a really good fight for her. I'd have been a bit more disappointed if they put Lisboa against another debutant fighter similar to Lisboa. I think against Jessica Rose Clark, I think Rose Clark is going to be able to fight Lisboa and show us where that ceiling's at for Lisboa, where she's at from a skill set and quality perspective. So yeah, for me, until I see this fight, I can't be sure of where Lisboa's at. She might be absolutely amazing, or she might completely flop because she's just never fought this level of competition before. My pause on Jessica Rose Clark, though, is, look, she's on a 2-fight losing skid, and both of those fights have come to round one armbars, which at this level in the UFC just does not cut it. She is aging a little bit as well. As a fighter, I do think she's got a good all-round base. She's got decent striking. She can wrestle. She can get these girls to the floor. She's got okay offensive jiu-jitsu, but obviously from a defensive jiu-jitsu perspective, like I say, she's been submitted twice with round one armbars in the last 2 fights in the UFC. So yeah, I think that Jessica Rose Clark is the fighter that I trust more in this fight because I know more about her, and I know that she's got the experience. I know that she's been in there with some good level of competition, whereas I've just got a ton of question marks on Lisboa. But ultimately, that's the reason why I can't pick Lisboa, because there's so many question marks that, questions that I can't answer. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jessica Rose Clark to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I hope you've all enjoyed the breakdowns, the predictions, and I hope you all enjoy the card. Like I said, in my opinion, it's a slightly weaker card this week, but, a card that I can't watch, unfortunately, due to being out and about this weekend. And yeah, look, if you're betting, then I hope you cash. I hope you smash the bookies. If I'm picking against you, if there's a prediction you don't agree with, it's me that replies into the comments into the YouTube channel. So drop a comment, tell me who you're predicting, tell me why we disagree, and I always try and make time to get back to everybody in the comments as well. So thank you for listening. If I have helped you, win a bet in the past, if you do like the predictions, the one way you can thank me is just by hitting that subscribe on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel, it really helps us out. Until next week, I'm Newsome, and I'll see you again next week.